You're listening to Manufactured with Kim van der Weert
and Jessie Lee, a podcast about sustainability and the making of fashion.
Join us every week in conversation with the people who manufacture what we wear. As my much wiser, but I'd like to point out nonetheless younger sister would say, I'm someone who fixates. I prefer the word persistent, but that's neither here nor there. For better or worse, this week's conversation is the result of my tendency to fixate. I first heard of Kandiani Denim back in December 2019 when I was in Amsterdam for the Christmas holidays and needed a new pair of jeans. After doing some research, I made my way to a boutique denim shop, Tenue Denim. I was probably their sales staff worst nightmare, no budget, and tons of questions. I wanted to know which companies had sewn the jeans and where the fabrics came from. The sales staff were very informed and good-natured, and after a barrage of questions and despite not buying anything, they kindly gave me a free copy of a magazine they published that included an interview with Kandiani Denim, a denim mill in Italy. What really piqued my interest was Kandiani's decision to brand their fabric. And by brand their fabric, I mean they didn't start to make jeans themselves, they decided to actually brand the fabric itself. At the time, I still lived in Cambodia and was in the middle of the soul-sucking job of having to shut down a factory and consolidate 2 production facilities into one, in part the result of being on the losing end of some nasty price negotiations with some of our biggest customers. The idea of turning the fabric itself, instead of the finished product, into a brand struck me as an interesting way for suppliers to get more leverage at the negotiating table, a way to force a more equal distribution of wealth across the supply chain. So it's been since December that I've been plodding away and trying to find an excuse to connect with Candiani. Fast forward to April when Jessie and I decided to start this podcast, and I immediately set to work harassing them. Eventually, I was put in touch with Danielle, who, to our delight, agreed to share the Candiani story with us on this podcast.
But it's impossible to talk about how and why Candiani decided to become a brand known to end consumers without covering other pieces of their story first. In this week's episode, Danielle shares Candiani's rich history as a family-owned and operated denim mill, still operating in the same Italian town that they started back in 1938. Why, when so many of the Italian mills were shutting down or moving east, was Candiani able to stay in Italy? We get also into Candiani's unique vertically integrated structure, and how this has enabled their pioneering approach to sustainability. Why have they opted for biodegradability over recycling? And how does regenerative agriculture and cotton sourcing strategies come into play? It's only with this framing that we are really able to do justice to Candiani's decision to start branding its own fabric, which is what we will cover in the next week's episode. So please tune in for part 2 of this chat next week. If you are on Instagram, please follow us to help us grow the conversation at manufactured_podcast.
Not much of an Instagram person? We feel you. We have a love-hate relationship with social media too. Sign up to our weekly newsletter instead on our website, www.manufacturedpodcast.com, to find out what we're reading, what we're thinking, and what we're wishing.
If you'd like to support us financially, you can make a Patreon donation via our homepage. And finally, don't forget to leave us a rating on iTunes and hit subscribe.
Danielle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me first and foremost. So Kandiani is a denim mill, currently a denim mill vertically integrated outside of Milan, Italy. But we have a long history. We were founded in 1938 by Luigi Candiani, basically in the same town where we currently are today. So Rovereto Conenduno, that is outside of Milan, Italy. We're a family-owned and operated company for the last 4 generations. So we're now in our 80th year. And Kandiani was founded as only a textile weaving facility. And we made masawa, which is a workwear fabric, and we were selling it in the markets in Milan. And the company then evolved with Primo Candiani, who decided to transition to making only denim fabrics. So,
and at that time, were you still selling mostly in Italy, or were you already shifting to other markets?
No, our main market was Italy at that time. And so, I mean, the evolution of Kandiani is really a picture of the evolution, I feel like, of the apparel textile industry as a whole. So then in the 80s, we were just leaders in denim fabrics. And Gianluigi Candiani, the third generation owner, came on, and he was the one that really pushed the industry towards stretch denim. Basically, the early 2000s was that evolution. So at that time, he was one of the first to really understand that stretch denim wasn't going to just be a fad, and that it was going to be something that, changed the industry from then on.
So is Kandiani the inventor of stretch denim?
No, we are not the inventor, but he kind of perfected it, I would say. Like he was the one that kind of technologically evolved it for its performance. So when you're talking about stretch denim, you're talking about not only its stretch, but its recovery. And so that's how I think what we are really known for now. Also being, big actors in the premium denim industry. So that also was during the early 2000s.
So can you give us a sense of the size and scale of Candiani?
Sure. So today, we're in our fourth generation. So Alberto Candiani is currently the general manager. And today, the scale is, we have the capacity to produce about 20 million meters a year. So this is also, we're also vertically integrated mill. So that means from raw cotton, we go through the spinning facility, the weaving, or the spinning, the dyeing, the weaving, and then the final finishing department, which the finishing helps either with the performance aspects, or it's more aesthetic as well. From raw cotton up to the finished fabric is what we
so
do.
Basically, like for people who might not know that much about the fashion supply chain, like you basically, your process starts when you get the raw cotton from your suppliers, and your process finishes when you hand off, let's say, bolts of fabric to people who are going to cut and sew it.
Exactly. So we sell, brands buy the fabric from us, and then we ship generally to their garment factories, wherever that may be. I mean, most of the places that we are shipping to currently are in Tunisia, North Africa, and Southeast Asia.
I think it's important maybe for listeners to understand why it's vertical. Maybe some listeners would think, well, it's natural, no? A fabric factory started from raw cotton and finish every step, and eventually you deliver something ready for cut and sew. That's natural. But actually, it's not natural. For instance, in China, a denim fabric factory would just process the cotton, spinning and dyeing, and then finish. Then the washing effect is actually not done in fabric mill, but somewhere else. What Candiani is doing, the brand is doing, is really unusual, because it's really from the cotton, the raw materials cotton, until the last step finishing. So basically, what you deliver to the garment factory is ready to be cut and sew and making it into pants.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't really realize that. I didn't realize how unique Kandiani was until actually I started working there. And it is really interesting. And I think Primo Kandiani was the one that started that transition to vertical integration. And he really saw it as a means for quality control.
And when was that? Was that in the 60s?
That was in the 60s, yeah. So he really saw it as a means to control the entire production process and to really get the end product that they were after. So instead of having to rely on third parties, they decided they could do it themselves. And I do think it was intelligent in the end, because it really allows us now, when sustainability is our priority and what we're working really is what we're focusing all of our R&D on, it enables the vertical integration of our production process, really allows for us to kind of test and evolve a lot of our sustainable innovations or technologies that we're using today, because we have this kind of constant feedback loop. So we can know if something, maybe a dye is not performing well, or maybe the fabric is woven in a certain way, like in the finishing department, you will see like if there is any sort of defect immediately. And so then you can go back and correct right away.
It's interesting. I want to dig into what your vertical integration means for your sustainability a bit more in a moment.
Okay.
But I want to backtrack a bit first because there's a lot of things that are unusual about Candiani. You're still in Italy. You have how many employees in Italy?
576.
And that's all your employees are in Italy. You're not anywhere else, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So when many other manufacturers were choosing to leave Italy, why did Candiani choose to stay? And what enabled you guys to be able to make this choice? Because I think a lot of people would have said it was just not a viable option. They would have liked to stay, but they couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, so as I don't know if I mentioned this before, but we were basically founded in the same city that we currently operate in today. And so what that really means is that, I mean, we basically work where we live, and literally. So Gianluigi Kandiani, the third generation owner, he lives on the premise of the factory. Primo Kandiani, the second generation owner, the grandfather of Alberto, he also has a house on the premise of the factory. And so they were they were dedicated to the community. It was their home. It's where they're from. And why they just chose to expand when they did. And forgive me, I can't remember exactly the year that they opened the second production facility in the same town. I believe it was in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. They decided to open there because, again, it didn't make sense for them to move overseas or to Turkey when the rest of the industry was moving east, because they were dedicated to the community where they're from. We have generations of families that have worked for Kandiani. We currently, I think, have 16 families that have multiple generations working at the factory right now, today. And so it really is the story of a community that has created this company together.
Can you explain a little bit, because a lot of other mills in Milan area did go out of business, and why you think Candiani survived when others did not?
Yeah, I think Candiani was able to kind of fare this storm because they were always adapting and innovating. And I think really the Gianluigi's kind of foresight into stretch denim is really what has carried the company over into this next generation, to be honest. And so their success in that has kind of safeguarded them from all of these fluctuations and complications in the market.
I want to go back now to the fact that Candiani is vertically integrated and how it affects and influences your approach to sustainability. One of the things you've said to me and to Jesse in the past is that you prioritize biodegradability over recycling. So can you share a little bit about what that actually means and why?
Sure. So sustainability for us is really a 360-degree approach. And again, going back to the vertical integration of the company, that allows this approach to be possible. I guess historically it's been based on the principles of recycle, reduce, and reuse. Now it's evolved. It's evolved to be something else almost, where we're focusing a lot on raw materials that we use. So sourcing is a huge thing for us, whether it is, working with cotton that is either organically produced or BCI, Better Cotton Initiative cotton, or even now we're moving into exploring different types of farm or sourcing cotton from different types of farming methods, or cultivated using different farming methods, such as regenerative agriculture. That's something that's really interesting for us.
What's regenerative agriculture?
Sure. I mean,
it's a big question,
but I just
think it's important to provide some context.
Sure, of course. No, but this is my favorite topic, honestly. Like, I think I want to become a farmer because of regenerative agriculture. It's a farming system that really prioritizes soil health. So it's really looking at the kind of microbiology of soil, and it's about how to plant certain crops that release different types of nutrients into the soil. So it's a very kind of, not, I wouldn't say regimented, because I think there's a lot of kind of interpretation that happens based on where you are. But there is a system and a philosophy that you can never have bare soil. So it's also not about like tilling. It's like a no-till practice. And it's something that's coming up. It's really, I feel like, about to explode in terms of being on people's radar regarding sustainability in general, but also, when we're talking about things like cotton. So it's a no-till practice. You have to have it's always ideal to have a cover crop at all times. And they've found that it's actually it becomes a carbon sink. When you have healthy soils, it becomes a carbon sink, and it basically it regenerates the earth. So it is like a tangible thing that you can almost see and feel, that where you're like regenerating the environment. It's also,
Right.
focusing on biodiversity. So whether that's, with planted crops or even wild, like, birds or insects, it's really trying to facilitate the like re-diversification of farmland. And it's just amazing. I've read and seen some, some examples that are just incredible. There was one example in California, actually, where I think there was a torrential downpour of water, and the rest of all of the neighbors of this one particular farm, they got totally flooded out. Like, they lost all their crops, everything was damaged. And this one, as opposed to that, it became like a sink for water. So that's the other thing. When you have healthy soils, it's able to absorb the water. So you reduce the runoff, you keep your topsoil, it regenerates the topsoil. So all of these things that a lot of people in agriculture, or those that are concerned with sustainability in agriculture, the things that are normally depleted with traditional, conventional agricultural systems, regenerative agriculture appears to repair. And so I just think it's amazing. And, with cotton is really discussed as a thirsty crop, like something that really needs, it's kind of sensitive. It needs a lot of like insecticides, pesticides, generally speaking. But when you see cotton grown on more of these regenerative systems, it becomes almost like beneficial for the soil and for everything else.
It's interesting, too, because this really has to be contrasted to what you said at the beginning, which was about recycling. A lot of times when people think about sustainability, they'll think about, well, okay, my pair of jeans at the end, when I'm done with them, needs to be recycled into some new material, right? And that's, I think, the goal of a lot of different actors within the sustainable fashion space, is to figure out ways of recycling different types of materials. And one of the challenges is that the technology for recycling, especially recycling fabrics that's mixed composition. So say a piece of stretch denim that is maybe cotton with some elastane is very difficult to recycle, because the way that you would recycle cotton is not the same as the way that you would recycle elastane. And so I'm guessing you deal with a lot of critics who would say, well, your denim is mixed with elastane, therefore it's not recyclable. So, you're not really sustainable. So what would you say to those critics?
I mean, it's a big topic in the industry now. Stretch denim makes up, I believe like 70 to 80% of the entire market. So stretch denim is the thing right now. Even though, I mean, there is a little bit of transition happening. People are looking for more kind of this heritage denim that may be like 100% cotton or mixed with hemp or things like that. But so it is definitely an issue. And you're right. Like, when you mechanically recycle stretch denim, you end up having the cotton fibers, the recycled cotton fibers, end up being mixed with little pieces of elastane or polyester or whatever else may be in there. And so what happens is it degrades the quality of the recycled yarn. And so currently, we have been focusing on going back to the issue of sourcing. So we're looking at sourcing different types of elastane that have an improved, sustainable kind of performance, I guess you could say. So, we work with a particular elastane producer named Roika, and they have, innovated different types of elastane that are, made from recycled material, or another one that is degradable. And recently, this year, and it's going to be something that we officially launch later, we created and patented a natural rubber elastane. And what this allows for is a biodegradable denim fabric. And it doesn't mean that it's going to biodegrade while you're wearing it. It's actually, you need very specific conditions and bacteria to make this fabric break down. It is in no way inferior in terms of quality or performance or anything. So you still have the same stretch and recovery capabilities that you would have in a normal like Lycra elastane, if not better. And then you have this added benefit at the end of its life cycle. So after its years of use or cycling through different users, it is able to be, currently it's biodegradable. We've done tests that have proven it's biodegradable, but we are about to arrive at compostability. So that's really what we are aiming for. And what that means, going back to this kind of concept of regenerative agriculture, this and our vision for our Coreva fabric, which is the name of the elastane and the fabrics made using this natural rubber elastane. It's actually elastodNA, so it's not actually an elastane technically speaking, but whatever. But so the idea would be that you could take this fabric or a pair of jeans, and that it could be used as a nutrient, like as an input for agriculture. So it becomes almost like a fertilizer in a way. And so we're currently running tests with that, about that in-house right now. So we have like 12 boxes in our backyard, basically, where we bury jeans. We're working with an agronomist who's like testing the organic matter in the boxes to see, how it's progressing. And we actually got a result yesterday that it's in 6 months, the organic matter in the test boxes that we're using, it has increased by 13%. So wow. Yeah, it's amazing. So we're talking about, around the world, we see that oil or soil and like topsoils are being depleted everywhere. And so then we really feel like this is a solution that, since the majority of components that come in a pair of jeans are from the biological cycle, they come from nature, it makes sense to put them back into that cycle. And so, it's not that we're against recycling, but for the time being, it really creates an inferior product. And so it doesn't make sense to take something, and we also think it's like a Band-Aid on a bigger problem, right? Overproduction is the main problem. And so we've done a number of recycling trials actually with certain brands. And what we see is they're perfectly good pairs of jeans that are actually getting downgraded into an inferior product. So it just doesn't make sense to us. And so we think that really focusing on producing quality over quantity, and then enabling this kind of alternative to an end of life as opposed to recycling, is what makes more sense for the time being. Until we have a recycling technology that really enables the staple length, because that's one of the main issues. Aside from it being mixed with other synthetic materials, the actual length of the cotton fiber is decreased by, I think, around half. And so it just becomes a weaker fiber, or a weaker...
When it's recycled.
Yeah, when it's recycled. So when it's spun into a new yarn, it just becomes fragile.
Like mechanical cotton recycling, like to paint a picture of it, it's like tearing apart the fibers and then trying to like put them back together. So of course that results in an inferior quality of product, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, that's really kind of our greater vision, our greater vision for circularity at the moment. But again, going back to sustainability, or going back to sourcing, the most important thing, for to enable a biodegradable product, it means that everything that you're putting into that needs to be of a certain quality, right? It can't be, we can't be using, I don't know, just to name a chemical like formaldehyde or different, even though formaldehyde is not used, generally speaking, to make denim, but like we can't be using toxic dye stuffs at the beginning, or if we were to, that means in the end, we wouldn't be able to achieve a biodegradable fabric.
I want to go back to your cotton sourcing, your strategy for cotton sourcing, and also just where it comes from, because it's actually all over the world.
So, cotton, we should be clear and explain to your listeners also that you have to make denim fabrics, and maybe this is all fabrics, you have to source cotton from all over, because it requires, we have our own mix, our own like recipe for how, for our fabrics, and what we know the different qualities that are needed to make our Kandiani quality. So that requires that we source cotton from all over the world.
But can you elaborate on that? Like, why is that? Is cotton from different places different quality, or?
It's because of the growing season. So like maybe, let's say the Ivory Coast in Africa, like got a lot of rain in the, during the flowering, which is the critical part. And so then that kind of reduces the quality of the fiber in the end. Or maybe there was a hurricane in Texas, so it just, it's not necessarily the quality itself. It may be how it is grown. So of course, the way it's cultivated will have an impact on the final quality of the fiber, but it really has to do a lot with kind of weather. It's more, one of the complexities of working with organic cotton, because you have to have a single origin fabrics. So it becomes, right. That is one of the complications and kind of, I would say, technical barrier, or maybe not barrier, but just complications with organic cotton. But also, so with that said, we are always working or looking for different suppliers. But going back to the importance of transparency, we are now looking to partner with cotton farmers themselves, because there's usually these mediary steps. So like usually there's the ginner and then there's the cotton trader. So we're trying to kind of.
And can you explain what those people do?
Sure. The ginner is basically is the processing step where you take all of the cotton bolls, they're called. So all of the cotton flowery part. You take all the cotton bolls to the ginner, and that's what takes out the fiber from, removes the fiber from all the seeds and the sticks and the leaves. And then the cotton trader is, it's an industry that they're the mediary step between.
They're connecting to the buyers.
Exactly. They connect the ginner to the buyer. It's a very complex marketplace, if you can imagine.
So I think that's interesting to point out. When you say you're sourcing cotton, it's not like, like people who aren't in the fashion industry might think like, oh, you must be buying from a farm, but that's really far from reality. And actually that's the direction you're trying to go in, but that's also, again, quite unusual.
I think it's a trend that's going to grow in the next years, 5 years, 10 years. But yeah, it's definitely one of the complexities too with kind of the ginning stage is you have, for example, in India, a lot of small producers that maybe have, 1 hectare of land or even less. And so what happens is they take all of their cotton and just dump it at the same ginner. And so it gets all mixed. And so that's where kind of the traceability becomes complicated in that step. And so there are efforts because of, cotton has been kind of branded as this, evil crop. And so we need transparency in order to mitigate that, because we don't know, it's hard to always know how, this cotton has actually been cultivated. It's hard to know how the farmer's been treated if you don't know who they are. So again, this is a major priority for us. We are looking for certain farmers that, again, going back to this regenerative agriculture, we're looking for farmers that are either organic or working in that regenerative way or are willing to. So And I guess the other key piece, talking again about the ginning step, is that we're looking for farmers that have a ginner nearby. So, or if not their own, because then that eliminates that kind of confusion, or that one step that everything becomes kind of muddled in.
So you do expect your cotton to continue to come from all over the world, say Turkey or, different Ivory Coast, different countries, but that your hope is that more of these processes would be done like in one place. So sort of consolidating the steps. So stuff is still coming from everywhere, but it's moving a lot less before that. Is that right or not?
And again, it just gives us the oversight on the supply chain, because if it's the farmer who's actually ginning the cotton, then, we know who they are. Like there's no confusion there.
It's so interesting, as it reminded me, I'm going to make a small advertisement for Netflix, maybe. There is a documentary series on Netflix called Rotten, focused on agriculture products. Yeah, each episode talking about a specific crop. So one episode talk about coffee beans, and that's so interesting because it sounds so. If you just ignore the words like coffee bean or coffee, you would believe first 10 minutes you would believe it's talking about garment business.
It's commodities basically. They're a commodity. So I think that's part of it that brings in these other actors such as traders and just, makes the supply chain so complex.
Yeah, it's also power and profit. When you have that power, you can basically monopolize this much market or this much profit. So it makes very difficult to have transparency or traceability, I think.
That's a really great point. Yeah.
I'm curious about I want to go back finally to being vertically integrated and like how this influences your approach to sustainability and what you're actually able to do, because it seems like sourcing is like the critical point of departure. So where you get your cotton, and then like having full control over what happens to it after that is essential. You wouldn't be able to do what you're doing without that. Is that right or not?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. That's right. And I think also, as I briefly mentioned before, I think it really comes down to us being able to test. So because we have this constant feedback loop, we can test and retry certain innovations that we're trialing.
I was also thinking it's also a lot of investment, as you say.
That's what I was wondering
too. For many other fabric producers, why would they separate finishing to another facility? Because denim, when you need to do the washing process on denim, it requires lots of machinery, and that's expensive. So I was just thinking it must be. Candiani is family-owned business, and for already 4 generations. I was wondering if there are any other investment
or financing.
Yes, financing. Yeah.
So we are an independent company, so it's family-owned and operated fully. We basically R&D is our priority, and so we're operating on.
When you say R&D, you
mean
research
and development is our priority. And so it means that most of our profit goes back into the company. And I think, really it's just the current strategy of the company, because we see the value and the importance of sustainability and to continue to be leaders in the industry. And we really think, it's kind of how we can differentiate ourselves, because we are not competitive.
Can you give a sense of like how much more expensive are you?
Roughly double. So
you're double.
I think on average our fabrics cost between like $4 and up to €7 a meter.
Which for consumers like who aren't in the fashion industry, that probably doesn't sound like very much. They're like, I pay $100 for these jeans, right?
Yeah, well, beside the fabric, there are a lot of other,
or even $300.
Yeah. You should talk to the brands because they're the ones with the markup. But to be fair, beside the fabric, there are a lot of other steps that go into making a pair of jeans.
And I think this is the perfect segue for what we're going to get into next week when we talk to you again, but this time about how the portfolio of Kandiani customers and brands that you work with has changed and evolved over the years. And actually your strategy for becoming a brand yourself, which I think is really revolutionary in terms of the potential that it has to change the narrative around suppliers being so easily replaceable. So please come back next week.
Thank you for listening to Manufactured.
To learn more about our guests and the issues we've chatted about today, sign up for our weekly newsletter on our website, www.manufacturedpodcast.com, or find us on Instagram at manufactured_podcast.
We'd also love to hear your stories and what you think. Collecting with listeners is the most rewarding part of what we do, so please don't be shy.
To be the first to find out about new episodes, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd also love it if you left us a review. Leaving a review helps other people find our show. And finally, if you'd like to support us financially, you can make a Patreon donation via our website homepage.
Thanks for listening and see you next week.